Chapter 5 of The Worm Ouroboros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jason Mills. The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edisson. Chapter 5. King Gorais's Sending. Of King Gazlark, and of the coming of the sending upon the demons on the high seas, with how the Lord Jus, by the egging on of his companions, was persuaded to an unadvised rashness. The next morning following that night when King Gorais the 12th sat crowned in Carse, as is aforesaid, was Gazlark a-sailing on the middle sea, homeward from the east. 7 ships of war he had, and they steered in column south-westward, close hauled on the starboard tack. Greatest and fairest among them was she who led the line, a great dragon of war, painted azure of the summer sea, with towering head of a worm, plated with gold and wrought with overlapping scales, gaping defiance from her bows, and a worm's tail erect at the poop. 75 picked men of Goblinland sailed on that ship, clad in gay kirtles and burnies of mail, and armed with axes, spears, and swords. Their shields, each with his device, hung at the bulwarks. On the high poop sat King Gazlark, his sturdy hands grasping the great steering paddle. Goodly of mien and well knit were all they of Goblinland that went on that great ship, yet did Gazlark outdo them all in goodliness and strength, and all kingliness. He wore a silken kirtle of Tyrian purple. Broad wristlets of woven gold were on his wrists. Dark-skinned was he, as one that hath lived all his days in the hot sunshine, clean-cut of feature, somewhat hooky-nosed, with great eyes and white teeth, and tight-curled black mustachios. Naught restful was there in his presence and bearing, but rashness and impetuous fire, and he was wild to look on, swift and beautiful as a stag in autumn. Teshmar, that was the skipper of his ship, stood at his elbow. Gazlark said to him, "Is it not one of the 3 gallant spectacles of the world, a good ship treading the hastening furrows of the sea like a queen in grace and beauty, scattering up the wave crests before her stem in a glittering rain?" "Yea, lord," answered he, "and what be the other 2? "One that I most unhappily did miss, whereof but yesterday we had tidings, to behold such a battling of great champions and such a victory as Lord Goldry obtained upon yonder vaunting tyrant." "The 3rd shall be seen, I think," said Teshmar, "when the Lord Goldry Bluzco shall, in your royal palace of Zajezaculo, amid pomp and high rejoicing, wed the young princess your cousin. Most fortunate lord, that must be lord of her whom all just censure doth acknowledge the ornament of the earth, the model of heaven, the queen of beauty." "Kind gods hasten the day," said Gazlark, "for truly 'tis a most sweet lass, and those kinsmen of Demonland my dearest friends, but for whose great upholding time and again, Teshmar, in days gone by, where were I today, and my kingdom, and where thou and all of you?" The king's brow darkened a little with thought. After a time he began to say, "I must have more great action. These trivial harryings, spoils of Nevria, chasing of Ezomokian blackamoors, be toys not worthy of our great name and renown among the nations. Something I would enact that shall embroil and astonish the world, even as the demons when they purged earth of the ghouls, ere I go down into silence." Teshmar was staring toward the southern bourne. He pointed with his hand. "There rideth a great ship, O king, and methinks she hath a strange look." Gazlark gazed earnestly at her for an instant, then straightway shifted his helm and steered towards her. He spake no more, staring ever as he sailed, marking ever as the distance lessened more and more particulars of that ship. Her silken sail fluttered in tatters from the yard. She rowed feebly, as one groping in darkness, with barely strength to stay her from drifting stern foremost before the wind. So hung she on the sea, as one struck stupid by some blow, doubting which way her harbour lay or which way her course. As a thing which hath been held in the flame of a monstrous candle, so seemed she, singed and besmirched with soot. Smashed was her proud figurehead, and smashed was her high forecastle, and burned and shattered the carved timbers of the poop and the fair seats that were thereon. She leaked, so that a score of her crew must be still a-bailing to keep her afloat. Of her 50 oars, half were broken or gone adrift, and many of the ship's company lay wounded, and some slain under her thwarts. And now was King Gazlark ware, as he drew near, that here was the Lord Jus on her ruined poop a-steering, and by him Spitfire and Brandok Dahar. Their jewelled arms and gear and rich attire were black with most stinking soot, and it was as though admiration and grief and anger were so locked and twined within them that none of these passions might win forth to outward showing on their frozen countenances. When they were within hailing distance, Gaslock hailed them. They answered him not, only beholding him with alien eyes. But they stopped the ship, and Gaslock lay aboard of her and came on board, and went upon the poop and greeted them. And he said, Well met in an ill hour. What's the matter? The Lord just made as if to speak, but no word came. Only he took Gaslock by both hands and sat down with a great groan on the poop, averting his face. Gaslock said, O Just, for so many a time as thou hast borne part in my evils and succoured me, surely right requireth I have part of thine. But Just answered in a thick, strange voice, all unlike himself. Mine, sayest thou, O Gaslock? What in the stablished world is mine, that am thus in a moment reaved of him that was mine own heartstring, my brother, the might of mine arm, the chiefest citadel of my dominion? And he burst into a great passion of weeping. King Gaslock's rings were driven into the flesh of his fingers by the grip of Just's strong hands on his. But he scarce wist of the pain, such agony of mind was in him for the loss of his friend, and for the bitterness and wonder that it was to behold these three great lords of Demonland weep like frightened women, and all their ship's company of tried men of war weeping and wailing besides. And Gaslock saw well that their lordly souls were unseated for a season because of some dreadful fact, the havoc whereof his eyes most woefully beheld, while its particulars were yet dark to him, yet with a terror in darkness that might well make his heart to quail. By much questioning he was at last well advertised of what had befallen, how they the day before, in broad noon, on such a summer sea, had heard a noise like the flapping of wings outstretched from one edge of the sky to another, and in a moment the calm sea was lifted up and fell again, and the whole sea clashed together and roared, yet was the ship not sunken. And there was a tumult about them of thunder and raging waters, and black night, and wildfire in the night, which presently passing away, and the darkness lifting, the sea lay solitary as far as eye might reach. And nothing is more certain, said Just, than that this is a sending of King Garais the 12th, spoken of by the prophets as a great clerk of necromancy beyond all other this world hath seen. And this is his vengeance for the wars we wrought for Witchland in the Foliot Isles. Against such a peril I had provided certain amulets made of the stone Alectorian, which groweth in the gizzard of a cock hatched on a moonless night, when Saturn burneth in a human sign and the lord of the third house is in the ascendant. These saved us, albeit sorely buffeted, from destruction, all save Goldry alone. He, by some cursed chance, whether he neglected to wear the charm I gave him, or the chain of it was broken in the plunging of the ship, or by some other means 'twas lost. When daylight came again, we stood but three on this poop where four had stood. More I know not. O Gaslock, said Spitfire, our brother that is stolen from us, with us it surely lieth to find him and set him free. But Just groaned and said, In which star of the unclimbed sky wilt thou begin our search? Or in which of the secret streams of ocean, where the last green rays are quenched in oozy darkness? Gaslock was silent for a while. Then he said, I think naught likelier than this, that Garais hath caught away Goldry Blusco into Carcy, where he holdeth him in duress, and thither must we straightway to deliver him. Just answered no word. But Gaslock seized his hand, saying, Our ancient love, and your oft succouring of Goblin land in days gone by, make this my quarrel. Hear now my rede. As I fared from the east through the straits of Rinnath, I beheld a mighty company of 40 sail, bound eastward to the Bestrian Sea. Well it was they marked us not, as we lay under the Isles of Elion in the dusk of evening. For touching later at Novasp in Pixieland, we learned that there sailed Laxus with the whole Witchland fleet, being minded to work evil deeds among the peaceful cities of the Bestrian seaboard. And as well met were an antelope with a devouring lion, as I and my 7 ships with those ill-doers in such strength on the high seas. But now, behold how wide standeth the door to our wishes. Laxus and that great armament are safe harrying eastward ho. I make question whether at this moment more than 90 or 10 fighting men be left in Carcy. I have here of mine own nigh on 500. Never was fair a chance to take Witchland with his claws beneath the table, and royally may we scratch his face ere he get them forth again. And Gaslock laughed for joy of battle, and cried, "O Juss, smells it not to thee, this rede of mine?" "Gaslark," said Lord Juss, "nobly and with that open hand and heart that I have loved in thee from of old, hast thou made this offer. Yet not so is Witchland to be overcome, but after long days of labour only, and laying of schemes and building of ships, and gathering of hosts answerable to the strength we bare of late against the ghouls when we destroyed them." Nor for all his urging might Gaslark move him any whit. But Spitfire sat by his brother and spake privately to him. "Kinsman, what ails thee? Is all high heart and swiftness to action crushed out of Demonland, and doth but the unserviceable juiceless skin remain to us? Thou art clean unlike that thou hast ever been, and could Witchland behold us now, well might he judge that base fear had ta'en hold upon us, seeing that with the odds of strength so fortunately of our side we shrink from striking at him." Just said in Spitfire's ear, "This it is, that I do misdoubt me of the steadfastness of the goblins. Too like to fire among dead leaves is the sudden flame of their valour, a poor thing to rely on if once they be checked. So do I count it folly trusting in them for our main strength to go up against Carsey. Also it is but a wild fancy that Goldry hath been transported into Carsey." But Spitfire leaped up a-cursing, and cried out, "O Gaslark, thou wert best fare home to Goblinland. But we will sail openly to Carsey, and crave audience of the great king, entreating him suffer us to kiss his toe, and acknowledging him to be our king, and us his ill-conditioned disobedient children. So may he haply restore unto us our brother, when he hath chastised us, and haply of his mercy send us home to Demonland, there to fawn upon Corsus or vile Carinius, or whomsoever he shall set up in Galing for his viceroy. For with Goldry hath all manliness departed out of Demonland, and we be milksops that remain, and objects of scorn and spitting." Now while Spitfire spake thus in wrath and sorrow of heart, the Lord Brandok Dahar fared fore and aft on the gangway about and about, as a caged panther fareth when feeding time is long overdue. And at whiles he clapped hand to the hilt of his long and glittering sword, and rattled it in the scabbard. At length, standing over against Gaslark, and eyeing him with a mocking glance, "O Gaslark," he said, "this that hath befallen breedeth in me a cruel perturbation, which carries my spirits outwards, stirring up a tempest in my mind, and preparing my body to melancholy and madness itself. The cure of this is only fighting. Wherefore, if thou love me, Gaslark, out with thy sword and ward thyself. Fight I must, or this passion will kill me quite out. 'Tis pity to draw upon my friend, but sith we be banned from fighting with our enemies, what choice remaineth?" Gaslark laughed, and seized him playfully by the arm, saying, "I will not fight with thee, how prettily soe'er thou ask it, Brandok Dahar, that savest Goblinland from the witches." But straight grew grave again, and said to Juss, "O Juss, be ruled. Thou seest what temper thy friends are in. All we be as hounds tugging against the leash to be loosed against Carsey in this happy hour, that likely cometh not again." Now when Lord Juss perceived them all against him, and hot-mouthed for that attempt, he smiled scornfully, and said, "O my brother and my friends, what echoes and quail-pipes are you become, who seem to catch wisdom by imitating her voice! But ye be mad like March hares, every man of you, and myself too. Break ice in one place, 'twill crack in more. And truly I care not greatly for my life, now that Goldry is gone from me. Cast we lots, then, which of us three shall fare home to Demonland with this our ship, that is but a lame duck since this sending. And he on whom the lot shall fall must fare home to concert the raising of a mighty fleet and armament, to carry on our war against the witches." So spake Lord Juss, and all they who had but a short hour ago felt themselves in such point that there was in them no hope of convalescence nor of life, had now their spirits raised in a seeming drunkenness, and thought only on the gladness of battle. The lords of Demonland marked each his lot, and cast it in the helm of Gaslark, and Gaslark shook the helm, and there leapt forth the lot of the Lord Spitfire. Right wrathful was he. So the lords of Demonland did off their armour, and their costly apparel that was black with soot, and let cleanse it. 60 of their fighting men that were unscathed by the sending went aboard one of Gaslark's ships, and the crew of that ship manned the ship of Demonland, and Spitfire took the steering paddle, and the demons that were hurt lay in the hold of the hollow ship. They brought forth a spare sail, and hoisted it in place of that was destroyed. So, in sore discontent, yet with a cheerful countenance, the Lord Spitfire set sail for the west. And Gaslark the king sat by the steering paddle of his fair dragon of war, and by him the Lord Juss and the Lord Brandok Dahar, who was like a war horse impatient for battle. Her prow swung north, and so round east away, and her sail broidered with flower de luces smote the mast, and filled to the north-west wind, and those other 6 fared after her in line ahead, with white sails unfurled, striding majestic over the full broad billows. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Worm Ouroboros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jason Mills. The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edisson. Chapter 6. The Claws of Witchland. Of King Gaslike's leading in the attempt on Carsey in the dark, and how he prospered therein, and of the great stand of Lord Juss and Lord Brandock de Ha. On the evening of the 3rd day, when as they drew near to within sight of the Witchland coast, they brailed up their sails and waited for the night, that so they might make their landfall after dark, for little to their mind it was that the king should have news of their farings. This was their plan, to beach their ships on the lonely shore some 2 leagues north of Tenemos, whence it was but 2 hours' march across the fen to Carsey. So, when the sun set, and all the ways were darkened, they muffled their oars, and rowed silently to the low shore, that showed strangely near in the darkness, yet ever seemed to flee and keep its distance as they rowed toward it. Coming at length ashore, they drew their ships upon the beach. Some 50 men of the goblins they left to guard the ships, while the rest took their weapons. And when they were marshalled, they marched inland over the sand dunes, and so on to the open fen. And seeing that the most of them by far were of goblin land, it was agreed between those 3, Juss, Brandock de Ha, and Gaslike, that Gaslike should have command of this emprise. So fared they silently across the marshes, that were firm enough for marching, so it were done circumspectly, rounding the worst moss-hags, and the small locks that were scattered here and there. For the weather had been fine for a season, and little new water stood on the marsh. But as they drew near to Carsey, the weather worsened and fine rain began to fall. And albeit there was little comfort marching through the drizzling murk of night towards that fortress of evil name, yet was Lord Juss glad at the rain, since it favoured surprise, and on surprise hung all their hopes. About the middle night they halted within 400 paces of the outer walls of Carsey, that loomed ghostly through the watery curtain, silent as it had been a tomb where Witchland lay in death, rather than the mailed shell wherein so great a power sat waiting. The sight of that vast bulk, couched shadowy in the rain, lighted the fire of battle in the breast of Gaslike, nor would aught please him save that they should go forthwith up to the walls with all their force, and so march round them, seeking where they might break suddenly in and seize the place. Nor would he listen to the counsel of Lord Juss, who would send forth detachments to select a spot for assault, and bring back word before the whole force advanced. Be sure, said Gaslike, that they within are all foxed and cup-shotten the 3rd night with swilling of wine, in honour of such triumph as he hath gotten by his sending, and but a sorry watch is kept on such a night. For who, say they, shall come up against Carsey now that the power of Demonland is stricken in pieces? The scorned goblins? Ha! A motion for laughter and derision. But thine advance guard might give them warning, or ever our main force could seize the occasion. Nay, but as the ghouls in an evil day, coming suddenly upon me in Zarge's Aculo, gat my palace taken ere we were well ware of their coming, so must we take this hold of Carsey. And if thou fearest to sally, right hotly do I desire it. For if they open the gate, we are enough to force an entry in despite of any numbers they are like to have within. Now Juss thought ill of this counsel. Yet, for a strange languor that still hung about his wits, he would not gainsay Gaslike. So crept they in stealth near to the great walls of Carsey. Softly ever fell the rain, and breathless stood the cypresses within the outer ward, and blank and dumb and untenanted frowned the black marble walls of that sleeping castle, and dour midnight waited over all. Now Gaslike issued command, bidding them march warily round the walls northward, for no way was betwixt the lofty walls and the river on the south and east, but on the north-east was he hopeful to find a likely place to win into the hold. In such order went they that Gaslike with 100 of his ablest men led the van, and after him came the demons. The main strength of the goblins followed after, with Teshmar for their captain. Warily they marched, and now were they on the rising ground that ran back north and west from the bluff of Carsey to the fen. Full eager were they of goblin land, and flown with the intoxication of impending battle, and they of the vanguard fared apace, outstripping the demons, so that Juss was fain to hasten after them, lest they should lose touch and fall to confusion. But Teshmar's men feared greatly to be left behind, nor might he hold them back, but they must run betwixt the demons and the walls, meaning to join with Gazlock. Just swore under his breath, saying, "See the unruly rabble of Goblinland, and they will yet be our undoing." In such case stood they, nor were Teshmar's folk more than 20 paces from the walls, when, sudden as night lightning, flares were kindled along the walls, dazzling the goblins and the demons, and brightly lighting them for those that manned the walls, who fell a-shooting at them with spears and arrows, and a slinging of stones. In the same moment opened a postern gate, whence sallied forth the Lord Corineus, with 150 stout lads of Witchland, shouting, "He that would sup of the crab of Witchland must deal with the nippers ere he essay the shell." And charging Gazlock's army in the flank, he cut them clean in two. As one wood fared forth Corineus, smiting on either hand with a 2-edged axe with heft lapped with bronze. And greatly though the folk of Gazlock outnumbered him, yet were they so taken at unawares and confounded by the sudden onslaught of Corineus that they might not abide him, but everywhere gave ground before his onslaught. And many were wounded, and some were slain, and with these Teshmar of Goblinland, the master of Gazlock's ship. For smiting at Corineus, and missing of his aim, he louted forward with the blow, and Corineus hewed at him with his axe, and the blow came on Teshmar's neck, and so hewed off his head. Now Gazlock, with the best of his fighting men, was come some way past the postern, but when as they fell to fighting, he turned back straightway to meet Corineus, calling loudly on his men to rally against the witches and drive them back within the walls. So when Gazlock was gotten through the press to within reach of Corineus, he thrust at Corineus with the spear, wounding him in the arm. But Corineus smote the spear shaft asunder with his axe, and leapt upon Gazlock, giving him a great wound on the shoulder. And Gazlock took to his sword, and many blows they banded that made either stagger, till Corineus struck Gazlock on the helm a great downstroke of his axe, as one driveth a pile with a wooden mallet. And because of the good helm he wore, given by Lord Juss in days gone by as a gift of love and friendship, was Gazlock saved, and his head not cloven asunder, for on that helm Corineus's axe might not bite. Yet with that great stroke were Gazlock's senses driven forth of him for a season, so that he fell senseless to the earth, and with his fall came dismay upon them of Goblinland. All this befell in the first brunt of the battle, nor were the lords of Demonland yet fully joined in the melee, for the great press of Gazlock's men were between them and the witches. But now Juss and Brandok the Har went forth mightily with their following, and took up Gazlock that lay like one dead, and just bade a company of the goblins bear him to the ships, and there was he bestowed safe and sound. But the witches shouted loudly that King Gazlock was slain, and at this chosen time Corund, that was come privily forth of a hidden door on the western side of Carsey, with 50 men, took the goblins mightily in the rear. So they, still falling back before Corineus and Corund, and their hearts sick at the supposed slaying of Gazlock, waxed full of doubt and dejection, for in the watery darkness they might nowise perceive by how much they outwent in numbers the men of Witchland. And panic took them, so that they broke and fled before the witches, that came after them resolute, as a stoat holdeth by a rabbit, and slew them by scores and by 50s as they fled from Carsey. Scarce 60 men of that brave company of Goblinland that went up with Gazlock against Carsey won away into the marshes and came to their ships, escaping pitiless destruction. But Corund and Corineus and their main force turned without more ado against the demons, and bitter was the battle that befell betwixt them, and great the clatter of their blows. And now were the odds clean changed about with the putting of the goblins out of the battle, since but few of Witchland were fallen, and they were as 4 to 1 against the demons, hemming them in and having at them from every side. And some shot at them from the wall, until a chance shot came that was like to have stove in Corund's helm, who straightway sent word that when the rout was ended he would make lark pies of the cow-headed doddy-pole whosoever he might be, that had set them thus a-shooting, spoiling sport for their comrades and endangering their lives. Therewith ceased the shooting from the wall. And now grim and woundsome grew the battle, for the demons mightily withstood the onset of the witches, and the Lord Brandok the Har rushed with an onslaught ever and anon upon Corund or upon Corineus, nor might either of these great captains bear up long against him, but every time gave back before Lord Brandok the Har, and bitterly cursed they one another, as each in turn was fain to save himself amid the press of their fighting men. Nor could one hope in one night's space to behold such deeds of derring-do as were done that night by Lord Brandok the Har, that played his sword lightly as one handleth a willow wand, yet death sat on the point thereof. In such wise that 11 stout sworders of Witchland were slain by him, and 15 besides were sorely wounded. And at the last Corineus, stung by Corund's taunts as by a gadfly, and well nigh bursting for grief and shame at his ill speeding, leapt upon Lord Brandok the Har as one reft of his wits, aiming at him a great two-handed blow that was apt enough to cleave him to the brisket. But Brandok the Har slipped from the blow lightly, as a kingfisher flying above an alder-shadowed stream avoideth a branch in his flight, and ran Corineus through the right wrist with his sword, and straight was Corineus put out of the fight. Nor had they greater satisfaction that went against Lord Juss, who mowed at them with great swashing blows, beheading some and hewing some asunder in the midst, till they were fain to keep clear of his reaping. So fought the demons in the glare and watery mist, greatly against great odds, until all were smitten to earth, save those two lords alone, Juss and Brandok the Har. Now stood King Geraint on the outer battlements of Carse, all armed in his black armour inlaid with gold. And he beheld those twain how they fought back to back, and how the witches beset them on every side, yet nowise might prevail against them. And the king said unto Gro that was by him on the wall, Mine eyes dazzle in the mist and torchlight. What be these that maintain so bloody an advantage upon my Kempery men? Gro answered him, Surely, O king, these be none other than Lord Juss and Lord Brandok the Har of Crothering. The king said, So by degrees cometh my sending home to me. For by my art I have intelligence, albeit not certainly, that Goldry was taken by my sending. So have I my desire on him I hold most in hate. And these, saved by their enchantments from like ruin, have been driven mad to rush into the open mouth of my vengeance. And when he had gazed a while, the king sneered, and said unto Gro, A sweet sight, to behold 100 of my ablest men flinch and duck before these twain. Till now methought there was a sword in Witchland, and methought Corineus and Corund not simple braggarts without power or heart, as here appeareth, since like boys well birched they do cringe from the shining swords of Juss and the vile upstart from Crothering. But Corineus, who stood no longer in the battle but by the king, full of spleen and his wrist all bloody, cried out, You do us wrong, O king! Juster it were to praise my great deed in ambushing this mighty company of our enemies, and putting them all to the slaughter. And if I prevailed not against this Brandok the Har, your majesty needs not to marvel, since a greater than I, Geraint the 10th, of memory ever glorious, was lightly conquered by him. Wherein methinks I am the luckier, to have but a gored wrist, and not my death. As for these twain, they be stick-frees, on whom no point or edge may bite. And naught were more to be looked for, since we deal with such a sorcerer as this Juss. Rather, said the king, are ye all-grown milksops. But I have no further stomach for this interlude, but straight will end it. Therewith the king called to him the old Duke Corsus, bidding him take nets and catch the demons therein. And Corsus, faring forth with nets, by sheer weight of numbers, and with the death of near a score of the witches, at length gat this performed, and Lord Juss and Lord Brandok the Har well tangled in the nets, and lapped about as silkworms in their cocoons, and so drawn into Carse. Soundly were they bumped along the ground, and glad enow were the witches to have gotten those great fighters scotched at last, for utterly spent were Corund and his men, and fain to drop for very weariness. So when they were gotten into Carse, the king let search with torches, and bring in them of Witchland that lay hurt before the walls, and any demons or goblins that were happed upon in like case, he let slay with the sword. And the Lord Juss and the Lord Brandok the Har, still lapped tightly in their nets, he let fling into a corner of the inner court of the palace, like 2 bales of damaged goods, and set a guard upon them until morning. As the lords of Witchland were upon going to bed, they beheld westward by the sea a red glow, and tongues of fire burning in the night. Corineus said unto Lord Gro, Lo, where these goblins burn their ships, lest we pursue them as they flee shamefully homeward in the ship they keep from the burning. One ship sufficeth, for most of them be dead. And Corineus betook him sleepily to bed, pausing on the way to kick at the Lord Brandok the Har, that lay safely swathed in his net, powerless as then to do him harm. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Worm Ouroboros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jason Mills. The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edisson. Chapter 7. Guests of the King in Carse. Of the 2 banquet halls that were in Carse, the old and the new, and of the entertainment given by King Geraint the 12th, in the one hall to Lord Juss and Lord Brandok the Har, and in the other to the Prince Lafaires, and of their leave-taking when the banquet was done. The morrow of that battle dawned fair on Carse. Folk lay long abed after their toil, and until the sun was high naught stirred before the walls. But towards noon came forth a band sent by King Geraint to bring in the spoil, and they took up the bodies of the slain, and laid them in Hoe on the right bank of the river Druima, half a mile below Carse, witches, demons, and goblins in one grave together, and raised up a great Hoe over them. Now was the sun's heat strong, but the shadow of the great keep rested still on the terrace without the western wall of the palace. Cool and redolent of ease and soft repose was that terrace, paved with flagstones of red jasper, with spleenwort, asafoetida, livid toadstools, dragon's teeth, and bitter moonseed growing in the joints. On the outer edge of the terrace were bushes of arbor vitae planted in a row, squat and round like sleeping dormice, with clumps of chalk-poured aconite in the interspaces. Many 100 feet in length was the terrace from north to south, and at either end a flight of black marble steps led down to the level of the inner ward and its embattled wall. Benches of green jasper, massively built and laden with velvet cushions of many colours, stood against the palace wall facing to the west, and on the bench nearest the iron tower a lady sat at ease, eating cream wafers and a quince tart, served by her waiting women in dishes of pale gold for her morning meal. Tall was that lady, and slender, and beauty dwelt in her as the sunshine dwells in the red floor and grey-green trunks of a beech-wood in early spring. Her tawny hair was gathered in deep folds upon her head, and made fast by great silver pins, their heads set with anikite diamonds. Her gown was of cloth of silver, with a knotted cordwork of black silk embroidery, everywhere decked with little moonstones, and over it she wore a mantle of figured satin, the colour of the wood-pigeon's wing, tinselled and overcast with silver threads. White-skinned she was, and graceful as an antelope. Her eyes were green, with yellow fiery gleams. Daintily she ate the tart and wafers, sipping at whiles from a cup of amber, artificially carved, white wine cool from the cellars below Carse, and a maiden sitting at her feet played on a 7-stringed lute, singing very sweetly this song. Ask me no more where Jove bestows, when June is past, the fading rose, for in your beauty's orient deep these flowers as in their causes sleep. Ask me no more whither do stray the golden atoms of the day, for in pure love heaven did prepare those powders to enrich your hair. Ask me no more whither doth haste the nightingale when May is past, for in your sweet dividing throat she winters and keeps warm her note. Ask me no more where those stars light that downwards fall in dead of night, for in your eyes they sit, and there fixed become as in their sphere. Ask me no more if east or west the phoenix builds her spicy nest, for unto you at last she flies, and in your fragrant bosom dies. No more, said the lady, thy voice is cracked this morning. Is none abroad yet thou canst find to tell me of last night's doings? Or are all gone my lord's gate, that I left sleeping still as though all the poppies of all earth's gardens breathed drowsiness about his head? One cometh, madam, said the damosel. The lady said, the Lord grow, he may resolve me. Though were he in the Stour last night, that were a wonder indeed. Therewith came Grow along the terrace from the north, clad in a mantle of dun-coloured velvet, with a collar of raised work of gold upon silver pearl, and his long black curly beard was perfumed with orange flower water and angelica. When they had greeted one another, and the lady had bidden her women stand apart, she said, My lord, I thirst for tidings. Recount to me all that befell since sundown, for I slept soundly till the streaks of morning showed through my chamber windows, and then I awoke from a flying dream of senates sounding to the onset, and torches in the night, and war's alarums. And there were torches indeed in my chamber, lighting my lord to bed, that answered me no word, but straightway fell asleep as in utter weariness. Some slight scratches he hath, but else unhurt. I would not wake him, for balm is in slumber. Also is he ill to do with, if one wake him so. But the tattle and wild surmise of the servants bloweth as ever to all points of wonder, as that a great armament of Demonland is disembarked at Tenemos, and all routed last night by my lord, and by Corineus, and Goldry Blusco slain in single combat with the king. Or that Jus hath set a charm on Laxus, and all our fleet making them sail like parricides against this land, Jus and the other demons leading them. And all slain save Laxus and Goldry Blusco, but these brought bound into Carse, stark mad and frothing at the lips, and Corineus dead of his wounds after slaying of Brandock de Har. Or, foolishly, and her green eyes lightened dangerously, that it was my brother risen in revolt to wrest Pixieland from the overlordship of Garais, and joined with Gazlock to that end, and their army overthrown and both ta'en prisoner. Groh laughed and said, Surely, O my lady Presmira, truth masketh in many a strange disguise when she rideth rumour's broomstick through kings' palaces. But somewhat of herself hath she shown thee, if thou conclude that an event was brought to birth betwixt dark and sunrise to stagger the world, and that the power of Witchland bloomed forth this night into unbeholden glory. Thou speakest big, my lord, said the lady. Were the demons in it? Ay, madam, he said. And triumphed on? And slain? All slain save Juss and Brandok de Har, and they taken, said Groh. Was this my lord's doing? She asked. Greatly, as I think, said Groh, though Corinius claimeth for himself, as commonly, the main honour of it. Presmira said he claimeth overmuch. And she said, There were none in it save demons? Groh, knowing her thought, smiled and made answer, Madam, there were witches. My lord Groh, she cried, thou dost ill to mock me. Thou art my friend. Thou knowest the prince my brother, proud and sudden to anger. Thou knowest it chafeth him to have Witchland over him. Thou knowest the time is many days overpast when he should bring his yearly tribute to the king. Groh's great ox eyes were soft as he looked upon the lady Presmira, saying, Most assuredly am I thy friend, madam. Belike, if truth were told, thou and thy lord are all the true friends I have in waterish Witchland, you two and the king, but who sleepeth safe in the favour of kings? Ay, madam, none of Pixieland stood in the battle yesternight, therefore let thy soul be at ease. But my task it was, standing on the battlements beside the king, to smile and smile, while Corinius and our fighting men made a bloody havoc of 400 or 500 of mine own kinsfolk. Presmira caught her breath and was silent a moment. Then, Gazlock? The main force was his, it appeareth, answered Lord Groh. Corinius braggeth himself his banesman, and certain it is he felled him to earth, but I am secretly advertised he was not among the dead taken up this morning. My lord, she said, my desire for news drinks deep while thou art fasting. Some, bring meat and wine for my lord Groh. And 2 damosels ran, and returned with sparkling golden wine in a beaker, and a dish of lampreys with hippocras sauce. So Groh sat him down on the jasper bench, and while he ate and drank, rehearsed to the lady Presmira the doings of the night. When he had ended, she said, How hath the king dealt with those twain, Lord Juss and Lord Brandok de Har? Groh answered, He hath them clapped up in the old banqueting hall in the Iron Tower. And his brow darkened, and he said, 'Tis pity thy lord lay thus long abed, and so came not to the council, where Corsus and Corinius, backed by thy stepsons and the sons of Corsus, egged on the king to use shamefully these lords of Demonland. True is that distich which admonisheth us, Know when to speak, for many times it brings danger to give the best advice to kings. And little for my health, and little gain withal, had it been had I then openly withstood them. Corinius is ever watchful to fling goblin in my teeth, but Corund weigheth in their councils as his hand weigheth in battle. Now as Groh spake, came the Lord Corund on the terrace, calling for still wine to cool his throat withal. Presmira poured forth to him. Thou art blamed to me for keeping thy bed, my lord, that shouldst have been devising with the king touching our enemies ta'en captive in this night gone by. Corund sat by his lady on the bench and drank. If that be all, madam, said he, then have I little to charge my conscience withal. For naught lies readier than strike off their heads, and so bring all to a fit and happy ending. Far otherwise, said Groh, hath the king determined. He let drag before him Lord Juss and Lord Brandok de Har, and with many fleers and jibes, Welcome, he saith, to Corsey. Your table shall not lack store of delicates while ye are my guests, albeit ye come unbidden. Therewith he let drag them to the old banquet hall, and he bade his smiths drive great iron staples into the wall, whereon he let hang up the demons by their wrists, spread-eagled against the wall, making both wrists and ankles fast to the staples with gyves of iron. And the king let dight the table before their feet as for a banquet, that the sight and the savour might torment them, and he called all us to his council thither, that we might praise his conceit and mock them anew. Said Presmira, A great king should rather be a dog that killeth clean, than a cat that patteth and sporteth with his prey. True it is, said Corund, that they were safer slain. He rose from his seat. 'Twere not amiss, he said, that I had word with the king. Wherefore so? asked Presmira. He that sleepeth late, said Corrund, eyeing her humorously, sometimes hath news for her that riseth betimes to sit on the western terrace. And this was I come to tell thee, that I but now beheld eastward from our chamber window, riding toward Carse out of Pixieland down the way of kings. La Fairies, she said. Mine eyes be strong enow and clear enow, said Corrund, but thou'd scarce require me swear to mine own brother at 3 miles distance, and as for thine, I leave thee the swearing. Who should ride down the way of kings from Pixieland, cried Presmira, but La Fairies. That, madam, let Echo answer thee, said Corrund, and it sticketh in my mind that the prince my brother-in-law is one that tieth to his heartstrings the remembrance of past benefits. This too, that none did him ever a greater benefit than Juss, that saved his life 6 winters back in Impland the Moor. Wherefore, if La Fairies be to share our revels this night, needful it is that the king command these gabblers to keep silence touching our entertainment of these lords in the old banquet hall, and in general touching the share of Demonland in this fighting. Presmira said, Come, I'll go with thee. They found the king on the topmost battlements above the Watergate, with his lords about him, gazing east away toward the long hills, beyond which lay Pixieland. But when Corrund began to open his mind to the king said, Thou growest old, O Corrund, and like a good-for-nothing chapman bringest not thy wares to market ere the market be done. I have already ta'en order for this, and straitly charged my people that naught befell last night save a faring of the goblins against Carse, and their overthrow, and my chasing of them with a great slaughter into the sea. Whoso by speech or sign shall reveal to La Fairies that the demons were in it, or that these enemies of mine are thus entertained by me to their discomfort in the old banquet hall, he shall lose nothing but his life. Corrund said, It is well, O king. The king said, Captain General, what is our strength? Corinius answered, 70 and 3 were slain, and the others, for the most part, hurt. I among them, that am thus one-handed for the while. I will not engage to find you, O king, 50 sound men in Carse. My lord Corrund, said the king, thine eyes pierced ever a league beyond the best among us, young or old. How many makest thou yon company? Corrund leaned on the parapet, and shaded his eyes with his hand, that was broad as a smoked haddock, and covered on the back with yellow hairs growing somewhat sparsely, as the hairs on the skin of a young elephant. He rideth with 60 horse, O king. 1 or 2 more I give you for good luck, but if I have a horseman fewer than 60, never love me more. The king muttered an imprecation. It is the curse of chance bringeth him thus pat, when I have my powers abroad, and am left with too little strength to awe him if he prove irksome. One of thy sons, O Corrund, shall take horse and ride south to Zorn and Permio, and muster a few score fighting men from the herdsmen and farmers with what speed he may. It is commanded. Now was the afternoon wearing to evening when the Prince La Fairies was come in with all his company, and greetings done, and the tribute safe bestowed, and the sleeping room appointed for him and his. And now ere all gathered together in the great banquet hall that was built by Guraius the 11th, when he was first made king, in the southeast corner of the palace. And it far exceeded in greatness and magnificence the old hall, where Lord Juss and Lord Brandock de Har were held in duress. 7 equal walls it had, of dark green jasper, specked with bloody spots. In the midst of one wall was the lofty doorway, and in the walls right and left of this, and in those that enclosed the angle opposite the door, were great windows placed high, giving light to the banquet hall. In each of the 7 angles of the wall, a caryatide, cut in the likeness of a 3-headed giant from ponderous blocks of black serpentine, bowed beneath the mass of a monstrous crab hewn out of the same stone. The mighty claws of those 7 crabs, spreading upwards, bare up the dome of the roof, that was smooth, and covered all over with paintings of battles and hunting scenes and wrestling bouts in dark and smoky colours, answerable to the gloomy grandeur of that chamber. On the walls beneath the windows gleamed weapons of war and of the chase, and on the 2 blind walls were nailed up all orderly the skulls and dead bones of those champions which had wrestled aforetime with King Guraius the 11th, or ever he appointed in an evil hour to wrestle with Goldred Blusco. Across the innermost angle facing the door was a long table and a carven bench behind it, and from the 2 ends of that table, set square with it, 2 other tables yet longer, and benches by them on the sides next to the walls stretched to within a short space of the door. Midmost of the table, to the right of the door, was a high seat of old cypress wood, great and fair, with cushions of black velvet broidered with gold, and facing it at the opposite table another high seat, smaller, and the cushions of it sewn with silver. In the space betwixt the tables 5 iron braziers, massive and footed with claws like an eagle's, stood in a row, and behind the benches on either side were 9 great stands for flamboys to light the hall by night, and 7 behind the cross-bench, set at equal distances and even with the walls. The floor was paved with steatite, white and creamy, with veins of rich brown and black and purples and splashes of scarlet. The tables resting on great trestles were massy slabs of a dusky polished stone, powdered with sparks of gold as small as atoms. The women sat on the cross-bench, and midmost of them the Lady Presmira, who outwent the rest in beauty and queenliness, as Venus the lesser planets of the night. Zenambria, wife to Duke Corsus, sat on her left, and on her right Sriva, daughter to Corsus, strangely fair for such a father. On the upper bench, to the right of the door, the lords of Witchland sat above and below the king's high seat, clad in holiday attire, and they of Pixieland had place over against them on the lower bench. The high seat on the lower bench was set apart for Lafayeries. Great plates and dishes of gold and silver and painted porcelain were set in order on the tables, laden with delicacies. Harps and bagpipes struck up a barbaric music, and the guests rose to their feet, as the shining doors swung open, and Garais the king, followed by the prince his guest, entered that hall. Like a black eagle surveying earth from some high mountain, the king passed by in his majesty. His byrnie was of black chainmail, its collar, sleeves, and skirt edged with plates of dull gold set with hyacinths and black opals. His hose were black, cross-gartered with bands of sealskin trimmed with diamonds. On his left thumb was his great signet ring, fashioned in gold in the semblance of the Worm Ouroboros that eateth his own tail. The bezel of the ring the head of the worm, made of a peach-coloured ruby of the bigness of a sparrow's egg. His cloak was woven of the skins of black cobras, stitched together with gold wire, its lining of black silk sprinkled with dust of gold. The iron crown of Witchland weighed on his brow, the claws of the crab erect like horns, and the sheen of its jewels was many-coloured like the rays of Sirius on a clear night of frost and wind at Yuletide. The Prince Lafayeries went in a mantle of black sendaline, sprinkled everywhere with spangles of gold, and the tunic beneath it of rich figured silk dyed deep purple of the pasque flower. From the golden circlet on his head 2 wings sprung aloft exquisitely fashioned, in plates of beaten copper, veneered with jewels and enamels and plated with precious metals, to the semblance of the wings of the oleander hawk-moth. He was something below the common height, but stout and strong and sturdily knit, with red crisp curly hair, broad-faced and ruddy, clean-shaved with high wide-nostrilled nose, and bushy red heavy eyebrows, whence his eyes, most like his lady sister's, sea-green and fiery, shot glances like a lion's. When the king was coming to his high seat, with Corrund and Corinius on his left and right, in honour of their great deeds of arms, and Lafayeries facing him in the high seat on the lower bench, the thralls made haste to set forth dishes of pickled grigs and oysters in the shell, and wilks, snails, and cockles fried in olive oil and swimming in red and white hippocras. And the feasters delayed not to fall on these dainties, while the cupbearer bore round a mighty bowl of beaten gold filled with sparkling wine the hue of the yellow sapphire, and furnished with 6 golden ladles, resting their handles in 6 half-moon-shaped nicks in the rim of that great bowl. Each guest, when the bowl was brought to him, must brim his goblet with the ladle, and drink unto the glory of Witchland and the rulers thereof. Somewhat greenly looked Corinius on the prince, and whispering Hemming, Corrund's son, in the ear, who sat next him, he said, True it is that Lafayeries is the showiest of men in all that belongeth to gear and costly array. Mark with what ridiculous excess he affecteth Demonland in the great store of jewels he flaunteth, and with what an apish insolence he sitteth at the board. Yet this lobcock liveth only by our sufferance, and I see he hath not forgot to bring with him to Witchland the price of our hand withheld from twisting of his neck. Now were borne round dishes of carp, pilchards, and lobsters, and thereafter story now of meats. A fat kid roasted whole, and garnished with peas on a spacious silver charger, kid pasties, plates of neats' tongues and sweetbreads, sucking rabbits in jellies, hedgehogs baked in their skins, hogs' haslets, carbonadoes, chitterlings, and dormouse pies. These and other luscious meats were borne round continually by thralls who moved silent on bare feet, and merry waxed the talk as the edge of hunger became blunted a little, and the cockles of men's hearts were warmed with wine. "What news in Witchland?" asked Lafayeries. "I have heard naught newer," said the king, "than the slaying of Gazlark." And the king recounted the battle in the night, setting forth as in a frank and open honesty every particular of numbers, times, and comings and goings, save that none might have guessed from his tale that any of Demonland had part or interest in that battle. Alphires said, "Strange it is that he should so attack you. An enemy might smell some cause behind it." "Our greatness," said Corineus, looking haughtily at him, "is a lamp whereat other moths than he have been burnt. I count it no strange matter at all." Presmira said, "Strange indeed, were it any but Gazlike. But sure with him no wild sudden fancy were too light, but it should chariot him like thistledown to storm heaven itself." "A bubble of the air, madam, all fine colours without and empty wind within. I have known others such," said Corineus, still resting his gaze with studied insolence on the prince. Presmira's eye danced. "O my lord Corineus," said she, "change first thine own fashion, I pray thee, ere thou convince gay attire of inward folly, lest beholding thee we misdoubt thy precept, or thy wisdom." Corineus drank his cup to the dreins, and laughed. Somewhat reddened was his insolent face about the cheeks and shaven jowl, for surely was none in that hall more richly apparelled than he. His ample chest was cased in a jerkin of untanned buckskin plated with silver scales, and he wore a collar of gold that was rough with smaragds, and a long cloak of sky-blue silk brocade lined with cloth of silver. On his left wrist was a mighty ring of gold, and on his head a wreath of black bryony and sleeping nightshade. Groa whispered Corund in the ear, "He bibbeth it down apace, and the hour is yet early. This presageth trouble, since ever with him indiscretion treadeth hard on the heels of surliness, as he waxeth drunken." Corund grunted assent, saying aloud, "To all peaks of fame might Gazlike have climbed, but for this same rashness. Naught more pitiful hath been heard to tell of than his great sending into Impland 10 years ago, when, on a sudden conceit that should lay all Impland under him and become the greatest king in all the world, he hired Zeldornius and Helteranius and Jalcanius Faustus." "The 3 most notable captains found on earth," said Alphires. "Nothing is more true," said Corund. "These he hired, and brought 'em ships and soldiers and horses and such a clutter of engines of war as hath not been seen these 100 years, and sent 'em whither? To the rich and pleasant lands of Bestria? No. To Demonland? Not a whit. To this Witchland, where with the 20th part the power hath now risked all and suffered death and doom? No. But to yonder hell-besmitten wilderness of Upper Impland, treeless, waterless, not a soul to pay him tribute had he laid it under him, save wandering bands of savage imps, with more bugs on their bodies than pence in their purses, I warrant you. Or was he minded to be king among the divils of the air, ghosts and hobthrushes that be found in that desert?" "Without controversy there be 17 several sorts of divils on the Maruna," said Corsus, very loud and sudden, so that all turned to look on him. "Fiery divils, divils of the air, terrestrial devils, as you may say, and watery divils, and subterranean divils. Without controversy there be 17 sorts, 17 several sorts of hobthrushes, and several sorts of divils, and if the humour took me I could name them all by rote." Wondrous solemn was the heavy face of Corsus, his eyes baggy underneath and somewhat bloodshot, his pendulous cheeks, thick blubber upper lip, and bristly grey moustachios and whiskers. He had eaten, mainly to provoke thirst, pickled olives, capers, salted almonds, anchovies, fumados, and pilchards fried with mustard, and now awaited the salt chine of beef to be a pillow and a resting place for new potations. The lady Zenambria asked, "Knoweth any for certain what fate befell Jalcanius and Helteranius, and Zeldornius and their armies?" "Heard I not," said Presmira, "that they were led by will o' the wisps to the regions Hyperborean, and there made kings?" "Told thee by the Madge Howlet, I fear me, sister," said Alphires. "When as I fared through Impland the moor, 6 years ago, there was many a wild tale told me hereof, but naught within credit." Now was the chine served in amid shallots on a great dish of gold, borne by 4 serving men, so weighty was the dish and its burden. Some light there glowed in the dull eye of Corsus to see it come, and Corund rose up with brimming goblet, and the witches cried, "The song of the chine, O Corund!" Great as a neat stood Corund in his russet velvet kirtle, girt about with a broad belt of crocodile hide edged with gold. From his shoulders hung a cloak of wolf's skin with the hair inside, the outside tanned and diapered with purple silk. Daylight was nigh gone, and through a haze of savours rising from the feast, the flamboys shone on his bald head set about with thick grizzled curls, and on his keen grey eyes and his long and bushy beard. He cried, "Give me a rouse, my lords, and if any fail to bear me out in the refrain, I'll ne'er love him more." And he sang the song of the chine in a voice like the sounding of a gong, and all they roared in the refrain till the piled dishes on the service tables rang. "Bring out the old chine, the cold chine to me, and how'll I charge him come and see? Brawn tusked, brawn well soused and fine, with a precious cup of muscadine. How shall I sing, how shall I look, in honour of the master cook? The pig shall turn round and answer me, Canst thou spare me a shoulder? A wee, a wee. The duck, goose, and capon, good fellows all three, shall dance thee an antic, so shall the turkey. But oh, the cold chine for me. How shall I sing, how shall I look, in honour of the master cook? With brewis I'll 'noint thee from head to theel, shall make thee run nimbler than the new-oiled wheel. With pie crust we'll make thee the 8th wise man to be, but oh, the cold chine for me. How shall I sing, how shall I look, in honour of the master cook? When the chine was carved and the cups replenished, the king issued command, saying, Call hither my dwarf, and let him act his antic gestures before us. Therewith came the dwarf into the hall, mopping and mowing, clad in a sleeveless jerkin of striped yellow and red macado, and his long and nerveless tail dragged on the floor behind him. Somewhat fulsome is this dwarf, said Lafayeries. Speak within door, prince, said Corineus. Know'st not his quality? I hath been envoy extraordinary from King Geraint the 11th, of memory ever glorious, unto Lord Jussin Galing and the lords of Demonland, and 'twas the greatest courtesy we could study to do them, to send 'em this looby for our ambassador. The dwarf practised before them to the great content of the lords of Witchland and their guests, save for his japing upon Corineus and the prince, calling them two peacocks, so like in their bright plumage that none might tell either from other, which somewhat galled them both. And now was the king's heart waxen glad with wine, and he pledged Gro, saying, Be merry, Gro, and doubt not that I will fulfil my word I spake unto thee, and make thee king in Zage's Aculo. Lord, I am yours for ever, answered Gro, but methinks I am little fitted to be a king. Methinks I was ever a better steward of other men's fortunes than of mine own. Whereat the Duke Corsus, that was sprawled on the table well nigh asleep, cried out in a great voice but husky withal, A brace of divils broil me, if thou sayest not sooth. If thine own fortunes come off but bluely, care not a rush. Give me some wine, a full weeping goblet. Ha! Ha! Whippy away! Ha! Ha! Witchland! When wear ye the crown of Demonland, O king? How now, Corsus, said the king, art thou drunk? But Lafayeries said, Ye swear peace with the demons in the Foliot Isles, and by mighty oaths are you bound to put by for ever your claims of lordship over Demonland. I hoped your quarrels were ended. Why, so they are, said the king. Corsus chuckled weakly. Ye say well, very well, O king, very well, Lafayeries. Our quarrels are ended. No room for more. For, look you, Demonland is a ripe fruit, ready to drop me thus in our mouth. Leaning back, he gaped his mouth wide open, suspending by one leg above it, and Hortoland basted with its own dripping. The bird slipped through his fingers, and fell against his cheek, and so on to his bosom, and so on the floor, and his brazen byrnie and the sleeves of his pale green kirtle were splashed with gravy. Whereat Corineus let fly a great peal of laughter. But Lafayeries flushed with anger, and said, scowling, Drunkenness, my lord, is a jest for thralls to laugh at. Then sit thou mum, prince, said Corineus, lest thy quality be called in question. For my part, I laugh at my thoughts, and they be very choice. But Corsus wiped his face and fell a-singing. Whene'er I bib the wine down, asleep drop all my cares. A fig for fret, a fig for sweat, a fig care I for cares. Sith death must come, though I say nay, why grieve my life's days with affairs? Come bib we then the wine down, of Bacchus fair to see, for alway while we bibbing be, asleep drop all our cares. With that Corsus sank heavily forward again on the table, and the dwarf, whose japes all else in that company had taken well, even when themselves were the mark thereof, leapt up and down, crying, Hear a wonder! This pudding singeth! When with 2 platters, thralls, ye have served it to the board without a dish. One were too little to contain so vast a deal of bullock's blood and lard. Swift, and carve it ere the vapours burst the skin. I will carve thee, filth, said Corsus, lurching to his feet, and catching the dwarf by the wrist with one hand, he gave him a great box on the ear with the other. The dwarf squealed and bit Corsus's thumb to the bone, so that he loosed his hold, and the dwarf fled from the hall, while the company laughed pleasantly. So flieth folly before wisdom which is in wine, said the king. The night is young. Bring me botargos, and caviar and toast. Drink, prince. The red Thramnian wine, that is thick like honey, wooeth the soul to divine philosophy. How vain a thing is ambition! This was Gaslike's bane, whose enterprises of such pitch and moment have ended thus, in a kind of nothing. Or what thinkest thou, Groa, thou which art a philosopher?" "Alas, poor Gaslark," said Groa, "had all grown to his mind, and had he gainst all expectation gotten us overthrown, even so had he been no nearer to his heart's desire than when he first set forth. For he had of old in Zages Aculo eating and drinking, and gardens, and treasure, and musicians, and a fair wife, all soft ease and contentment all his days. And at the last, howsoe'er we shape our course, cometh the poppy that abideth all of us by the harbour of oblivion hard to cleanse. Dry withered leaves of laurel or of cypress tree, and a little dust. Naught else remaineth." "With a sad brow I say it," said the king. "I hold him wise that resteth happy, even as the red foliot, and tempteth not the gods by overmounting ambition to his dejection." Lephaires had thrown himself back in his high seat, with his elbows resting on its lofty arms, and his hands dangling idly on either side. With head held high, and incredulous smile, he hearkened to the words of Geraint the king. Groa said in Coron's ear, "The king hath found strange kindness in the cup." "I think thou and I be clean out of fashion," answered Corond, whispering, "that we be not yet drunken. The cause whereof is that thou drinkest within measure, which is good, and me this amethyst at my belt keepeth sober, where I never saw surfeit swelled with wine." Lephaires said, "You are pleased to jest, O king. For my part, I had as lief have this musk-million on my shoulders, as a head so blockish as to want ambition." "If thou wert not our princely guest," said Corineus, "I had called that spoke in the right fashion of a little man. Which land affecteth not such vaunts, but can afford to speak as our lord the king in proud humility. Turkey cocks do strut and gobble, not so the eagle, who holdeth the world at his discretion." "Pity on thee," cried the prince, "if this cheap victory turned thee so giddy. Goblins!" Corineus scowled. Corsus chuckled, saying to himself, but loud enough for all to hear, "Goblins, quotha! They were small game had they been all. Aye, there it is, had they been all." The king's brow was like a foul black cloud. The women held their breath. But Corsus, blandly insensible of these gathering thunders, beat time on the table with his cup, drowsily chanting to a most mournful air, "When birds in water deep do lie, and fishes in the air do fly, when water burns and fire doth freeze, and oysters grow as fruits on trees." A resounding heccup brought him to a full close. The talk had died down, the lords of Witchland ill at ease, studying to wear their faces to the bent of the king's looks. But Presmira spake, and the music of her voice came like a refreshing shower. "This song of my lord Corsus," she said, "made me hopeful for an answer to a question in philosophy. But Bacchus, you see, hath ta'en his soul into Elysium for a season, and I fear me nor truth nor wisdom cometh from his mouth tonight. And this was my question, whether it be true that all animals of the land are in their kind in the sea. My lord Corineus, or thou, my princely brother, can you resolve me?" "Why, so it is received, madam," said Lephaires. "An inquiry will show thee many pretty instances, as the sea frog, the sea fox, the sea dog, the sea horse, the sea lion, the sea bear. And I have known the barbarous people of Esamokia eat of a conserve of sea mice, mashed and brayed in a mortar with the flesh of that beast named Bos Marinus, seasoned with salt and garlic." "Foh! Speak to me somewhat quickly," cried the Lady Sreva, "ere in imagination I taste such a nasty meat. Prithee, yonder gold peaches and raisins of the sun as an antidote." "Lord Groa will instruct thee better than I," said Lephaires. "For my part, albeit I think nobly of philosophy, yet have I little leisure to study it. Oft have I hunted the badger, yet never answered that question of the doctor's, whether he hath the legs of one side shorter than of the other. Neither know I, for all the lampreys I have eat, how many eyes the lamprey hath, whether it be 9 or 2. Presmira smiled. "O my brother, thou art too smoor'd, I fear me, in the dust of action and the field, to be at accord with these nice searchings. But be there birds under the sea, my lord Groa?" Groa made answer, "In rivers, certainly, though it be but birds of the air sojourning for a season, as I myself have found them in outer Impland, asleep in winter time at the bottom of lakes and rivers, two together, mouth to mouth, wing to wing. But in the spring they revive again, and by the woods are full of their singing. And for the sea, there be true sea cuckoos, sea thrushes, and sea sparrows, and many more." "It is passing strange," said Zenambria. Corsus sang. when sorcerers do leave their charm, when spiders do the fly no harm. Presmira turned to Coron, saying, Was there not a merry dispute betwixt you, my lord, concerning the toad and the spider, thou maintaining that they do poisonously destroy one another, and my lord Grow that he would show thee to the contrary? 'Twas even so, lady, said Corond, and it is yet in controversy. Chorus sang, And when the blackbird leaves to sing, and likewise serpents for to sting, then you may say, and justly too, the old world now is turned anew. And so sank back into bloated silence. My lord the king, cried Presmira, I beseech you give order for the ending of this difference between two of your council, ere it wax to dangerous heat. Let them be given a toad, O king, and spiders without delay, that they may make experiment before this goodly company. Therewithal fell a laughing, and the king commanded a thrall, who shortly brought fat spiders to the number of 7, and a crystal wine-cup, and enclosed with them beneath the cup a toad, and set all before the king, and all beheld them eagerly. I will wager 2 firkins of pale Permian wine to a bunch of radishes, said Corond, that victory shall be given unto the spiders. Behold how without resistance they do sit upon his head and pass all over his body. Grow said, Done. Thou wilt lose the wager, Corond, said the king. This toad taketh no hurt from the spiders, but sitteth quiet out of policy, tempting them to security, that upon advantage he may swallow them down. While they watched, fruits were borne in, queen apples, almonds, pomegranates, and pistic nuts, and fresh bowls and jars of wine, and among them a crystal flagon of the peach-coloured wine of Crothering, vintaged many summers ago in the vineyards that stretched southward toward the sea from below the castle of Lord Brandock de Har. Corineus drank deep, and cried, "'Tis a royal drink, this wine of Crothering. Folk say it will be good cheap this summer." Whereat Lafayeries shot a glance at him, and the king marking it, said in Corineus's ear, "Wilt thou be prudent? Let not thy pride flatter thee to think aught shall avail thee, any more than my vilest thrall, if by thy doing this prince smell out my secrets." By then was the hour waxing late, and the women took their leave, lighted to the doors in great state by thralls with flamboys. In a while, when they were gone, "A plague of all spiders!" cried Corond. "Thy toad hath swallowed one already." "2 more," said Grow. "Thy Theoric crumbleth apace, O Corond. He hath 2 at a gulp, and but 4 remain." The Lord Corineus, whose countenance was now aflame with furious drinking, held high his cup, and catching the prince's eye, "Mark well, Lafayeries," he cried, "a sign and a prophecy. First 1, next 2 at a mouthful, and early after that, as I think, the 4 that remain. Art not afeard lest thou be found a spider when the brunt shall come?" "Hast thou drunk thyself horn mad, Corineus?" said the king under his breath, his voice shaken with anger. "He is as witty a marmalade eater as ever I conversed with," said Lafayeries, "but I cannot tell what the dickens he means." "That," answered Corineus, "which should make thy smirking face turn serious. I mean our ancient enemies, the hastardly mongrels of Demonland. First gulp Goldry, taken heaven knows whither by the king's sending in a deadly scud of wind." "The devil damn thee!" cried the king. "What drunken brabble is this?" But the Prince Lafayeries waxed red as blood, saying, "This it is then that lieth behind this hudder-mudder, and ye go to war with Demonland? Think not to have my help therein." "We shall not sleep the worse for that," said Corineus. "Our mouth is big enough for such a morsel of march-pane as thou, if thou turn irksome." "Thy mouth is big enough to blab the secretest intelligence, as we now most laughably approve," said Lafayeries. "Were I the king, I would draw lobster's whiskers on thy skin for a tipsy and a prattling popinjay." "An insult!" cried the Lord Corineus, leaping up. "I would not take an insult from the gods in heaven. Reach me a sword, boy. I will make bestiary and cutworks in his guts." "Peace on your lives!" said the king in a great voice, while Corond went to Corineus and Grow to the prince to quiet them. "Corineus is wounded in the wrist and cannot fight, and belike his brain is fevered by the wound." "Heal him then of this carving the goblins gave him, and I will carve him like a capon," said the prince. "Goblins!" said Corineus fiercely. "No, vile fellow, the best swordsman in the world gave me this wound. Had it been thou that stood before me, I had cut thee into steaks, that art caponed already." But the king stood up in his majesty, saying, "Silence on your lives!" And the king's eyes glittered with wrath, and he said, "For thee, Corineus, not thy hot youth and rebellious blood, nor yet the wine thou hast swilled into that greedy belly of thine, shall mitigate the rigour of my displeasure. Thy punishment I reserve unto tomorrow. And thou, Lafayeries, Look thou bear thyself more humbly in my halls. Overpert was the message brought me by thine herald at thy coming hither this morning, and too much it smacked of a greeting from an equal to an equal, calling thy tribute a gift, though it, and thou, and all thy principality are mine by right to deal with as seems me good. Yet did I bear with thee, unwisely as I think, since thy pertness nourished by my forbearance springeth up yet rancour at my table, and thou insultest and brawlest in my halls. Be advised lest my wrath forge thunderbolts against thee. The Prince Lafaires answered and said, Keep frowns and threats for thine offending thralls, O king, since me they affright not, and I laugh them to scorn. Nor am I careful to answer thine injurious words, since well thou knowest my old friendship unto thine house, O king, and unto Witchland, and by what bands of marriage I am bound in love to the Lord Corrund, to whom I gave my lady sister. If it suit not my stomach to proclaim like a servile minister thy suzerainty, yet needest thou not to carp at this, since thy tribute is paid thee, aye, and in over measure. But unto Demonland am I bound, as all the world knoweth, and sooner shalt thou prevail upon the lamps of heaven to come down and fight for thee against the demons than upon me. And unto Corineath, that so boasteth, I say that Demonland hath ever been too hard for you witches. Goldri Bloodsko and Brandok Dahar have shown you this. This is my counsel unto thee, O king, to make peace with Demonland. My reasons, first, that thou hast no just cause of quarrel with them. Next, and this should sway thee more, that if thou persist in fighting against them, it will be the ruin of thee and of all Witchland. The king bit his fingers with signs of wonderful anger, and for a minute's time no sound was in that hall. Only Corrund spake privately to the king, saying, Lord, O for all sakes swallow your royal rage. You may whip him when my son Hackman returneth, but till then he outnumbers us, and your own party so overwhelmed with wine that, trust me, I would not adventure the price of a turnip on our chances if it come to fighting. Troubled at heart was Corrund, for well he knew how dear beyond account his lady wife held the keeping of the peace betwixt Lafaires and the witches. In this moment Corsus, somewhat roused in an evil hour out of lethargy by the loud talk and movement, began to sing, When all the prisons hereabout have justled all their prisoners out, because indeed they have no cause to keep 'em in by common laws. Wherein Corineus, in whom wine and quarrelling and the king's rebukes had lighted a fire of reckless and outrageous malice, before which all counsels of prudence or policy were dissipated like wax in a furnace, shouted loudly, Wilt see our prisoners, prince, in the old banquet hall, to prove thyself an ass? What prisoners? Cried the prince, springing to his feet. Hell's furies! I am weary of these dark equivocations, and will know the truth. Wilt thou rage so beastly? Said the king. The man is drunk. No more wild words. Thou canst not daff me so. I will know the truth, said Lafaires. So thou shalt, said Corineus. This it is, that we witches be better men than thou, and thy hen-hearted pixies, and better men than the accursed demons. No need to hide it further. 2 of that breed we have laid by the heels, and nailed 'em up on the wall of the old banquet hall, as farmers nail up weasels and polecats on a barn door. And there shall they bide till they be dead. Juss and Brandok Dahar. O most villainous lie, said the king, I'll have thee hewn in pieces. But Corineus said, I nurse your honour, O king. We must no longer skulk before these pixies. Thou diest for it, said the king, and it is a lie. Now was dead silence for a space. At last the prince sat down slowly. His face was white and drawn, and he spake unto the king, slowly and in a quiet voice. O king, that I was somewhat hot with you, forgive me. And if I have omitted any form of allegiance due to you, think rather that in my blood it is to chafe at such ceremonies, than that I had any lack of friendship unto you, or ever dreamed of questioning your overlordship. Aught that you shall require of me, and that lieth with mine honour, aught of ceremony or fealty, will I with joy perform. And, save against Demonland, is my sword ready against your enemies. But here, O king, tottereth a tower ready to fall athwart our friendship, and pash it in pieces. It is known to you, O king, and to all the lords of Witchland, that my bones were whitening these 6 years in Impland the Moor if Lord Juss had not saved me from the barbarous imps that followed Fax Fe Faz, who besieged me 4 months with my small following shut up in Leda Nanguna. My friendship shall you have, O king, if you yield me up my friends. But the king said, I have not thy friends. Show me then the old banquet hall, said the prince. The king said, I will show it thee anon. I will see it now, said the prince, and he rose from his seat. I will dissemble with thee no longer, said the king. I do love thee well, But when thou askest me to yield up to thee Juss and Brandok Dahar, thou askest a thing all Pixieland and thy dear's heart's blood were unable to purchase from me. These be my worst enemies. Thou knowest not at what cost of toil and danger I have at last laid hand on them. And now let not thy hopes make thee an unbeliever, when I swear to thee that Juss and Brandok Dahar shall rot and die in prison. And for all his gentle speeches, and offers of wealth and rich advantage, and upholding in peace and war, might not Laphairies shake the king. And the king said, Forbear, Laphairies, or thou wilt vex me. They must rot. So when the Prince Laphairies saw that he might not move the king by soft words, he took up his fair crystal goblet, egg-shaped, with 3 claws of gold to stand withal, welded to a collar of gold about its middle, bossed with topazes, and hurled it at Garais the king, so that the goblet smote him on the forehead, and the crystal was brast asunder with the force of the blow, and the king's forehead laid open, and the king strook senseless. Therewith was huge uproar in the banquet hall. Nor would Coran that any should have speedier hand therein than he, but catching up his 2-edged sword, and crying, Look to the king, Gro, here's distressful revels, he leaped upon the table. And his sons likewise, and Galandus, and the other witches seized their weapons, and in like manner did Laphairies and his men, and there was battle in the great hall in Carcy. Corineus, whose left hand only might as now wield weapon, even so sprang forth in most gallant wise, calling upon the prince with many vile words to abide his onset. But the fumes of unbridled potations, that being flown to his brain and made him frantic mad, wrought in his legs more foggily, dulling their wonted nimbleness, and his foot sliding in a puddle of spilt wine, he fell backwards a grievous fall, striking his head against the polished table. And Corsus, that was now well nigh speechless and quite stupefied with drink, so that a baby might tell as well as he what meant this hubbub, reeled cup in hand, shouting, Drunkenness is better for the body than physic. Drink always, and you shall never die. So shouting, he was smitten square in the mouth by a breast of veal, flung at him by Eleron of Pixieland, the captain of the prince's bodyguard, and so fell like a hog athwart Corineus, and there lay without sense or motion. Then were the tables overset, and wounds given and taken, and swiftly ran the tide of vantage against the witches. For albeit the Pixies were none such great soldiers as they of Witchland, yet this served them mightily, that they were well nigh sober, and their foes as so many casks filled with wine, staggering and raving for the most part from their long tippling and quaffing. Nor did Coran's amethyst avail him thoroughly, but the wine clogged his veins, so that he waxed scant of breath, and his strokes lighter and slower than they were wont. Now for the love he bare his sister Presmira, and for his old kindness' sake for Witchland, the prince charged his men to fight only for the overpowering of the witches, slaying none if so it might be, and on their lives to look to it that the Lord Coran took no hurt. And when they had fairly gotten the mastery, Laphairies made certain of his folk take jars of wine, and therewith souse Corund and his men most lustily in the face, while others held them at weapons' point, until by the power of the wine both within and without, they were well brought under. And they barricaded the great doorway of the hall with the benches and tabletops, and heavy oaken trestles, and Laphairies charged Eleron hold the door with the most of his following, and set guards without each window, that none might come forth from the hall. But the prince himself took flamboys and went 6 in company to the old banquet hall, overpowered the guard, brake open the doors, and so stood before Lord Juss and Lord Brandok Dahar, that hung shackled to the wall side by side. Something dazzled they were in the sudden torchlight, but Lord Brandok Dahar spake and hailed the prince, and his mocking, haughty, lazy accents were scarcely touched with hollowness, for all his hunger-starving, and long watching, and the cark and care of his affliction. Laphairies, he said, day ne'er broke up till now, and methought ye were yonder false fitchews fostered in filth and fen, the spawn of Witchland, returned again to fleer and flout at us. Laphairies told them how things had gone, and he said, Occasion gallopeth apace. Upon this bargain do I loose you, that ye come incontinently with me out of Carcy, and seek no revenge tonight upon the witches. Juss said yea to this, and Brandok Dahar laughed, saying, Prince, I so love thee, I could refuse thee nothing, were it shave half my head, and go in fustian till harvest time, sleep in my clothes, and discourse pious nothing 7 hours a day with my lady's lapdog. This night we be utterly thine. An instant only bear with us. This fare shows too good to rest untasted after so much looking on. It were discourteous, too, to leave it so. Therewith, their chains being now stricken off, he eat a great slice of turkey, and 3 quails boned and served in jelly, and Juss a dozen plovers' eggs, and a cold partridge. Lord Brandok Dahar said, I prithee break the egg-shells, Juss, when the meat is out, lest some sorcerer should prick or write thy name thereon, and so mischief thy person. and pouring out a stoup of wine, he quaffed it off, and filling it again, "Perdition catch me, if it be not mine own wine of Crothering. So any a carefuller host than King Gorice." And he pledged Lord Juss in the second cup, saying, "I will drink with thee next in Corsey, when the King of Witchland and all the lords thereof are slain." Thereafter they took their weapons that lay by on the table, set there to distress their souls, and with little expectation they should so take them up again. And glad at heart, albeit somewhat stiff of limb, they went forth with La Fieries from that banquet hall. When they were come into the courtyard, Juss spake and said, "Herein might honour hold us back, even hadst thou made no bargain with us, La Fieries. For great shame it were to us, and we fell upon the lords of Witchland when they were drunk, and unable to meet us in equal battle. But let us, ere we be gone from Corsey, ransack this hold for my kinsman Goldry Bluzco, since for his sake only, and in hope to find him here, we fared on this journey. So you touch no other thing but only Goldry, if ye shall find him, I am content," said the prince. So when they had found keys, they ransacked all Corsey, even to the dread chamber where the king had conjured, and the vaults and cellars below the river, but it availed not. And as they stood in the courtyard in the torchlight, there came forth on a balcony the Lady Presmira in her nightgown, disturbed by this ransacking. Ethereal as a cloud she seemed, pavilioned in the balmy night, as a cloud touched by the exhalations of the unrisen moon. "What transformation is this?" said she. "Demons loose in the court." "Content thee, dear heart," said the prince. "Thy man is safe, and all else beside, as I think, save that the king hath a broken head, the which I lament, and will without question soon be healed. They lie all in the banquet hall tonight, being too sleepy sodden with the feast to take their chambers." Presmira cried, "My fears are fallen upon me. Art thou broken with Witchland?" "That may I not forejudge," he answered. "Tell them tomorrow that naught I did in hatred, and naught but what I was by circumstance enforced to. For I am not such a coward, nor so great a villain, as leave my friends caged up, while strength is left me to work for their setting free." "You must straightway forth from Corsey," said Presmira, "and that of the instant. My stepson Hackmon, which was sent to gather strength to awe thee if need were, rideth by now from the south with a great company. Thy horses are fresh, and ye may well outdistance the king's men if they ride after you. If thou wilt not yet raise up a river of blood betwixt us, begone." "Why, fare thee well then, sister, and doubt it not, these rifts between me and Witchland shall soon be patched up and forgot." So spake the prince with a merry voice, yet grieved at heart, for well he weened the king should never pardon him that blow, nor his robbing him of his prey. But she said sadly, "Farewell, my brother, and my heart tells me I shall never see thee more. When thou tookst these from prison, thou didst dig up 2 mandrakes shall bring sorrow and death to thee and to me and to all Witchland." The prince was silent, but Lord Juss bowed to Presmira, saying, "Madam, these things be on the knees of fate. But imagine not that while life and breath be in us, we shall leave to uphold the prince thy brother. His foes be our foes for this night's sake." "Thou swearest it?" she said. He answered, "Madam, I swear it unto thee and unto him." The Lady Presmira withdrew sadly to her chamber, and in short space she heard their horse hoofs on the bridge, and looking forth beheld where they galloped on the way of kings, dim in the coppery light of a waning moon rising over Pixieland. So sate she by the window of Coran's lofty bedchamber, gazing through the night, long after her brother and the lords of Demonland and her brother's men were ridden beyond her seeing, long after their last hoof-beat had ceased to echo on the road. In a while fresh horse-hoofs sounded from the south, and a noise as of many riding in company, and she knew it was young Hackmon back from Permio. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Worm Ouroboros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jason Mills. The Worm Ouroboros by E. R. Edisson. Chapter 8. The First Expedition to Impland. Of the homecoming of the demons, and how Lord Juss was taught in a dream whither he must seek for tidings of his dear brother, and how they took counsel at Crothering, and determined of their expedition to Impland. Midsummer night, ambrosial, starry-kirtled, walked on the sea, as the ship that brought the demons home drew nigh to her journey's end. The cloaks of Lord Juss and Lord Brandock de Ha, who slept on the poop, were wet with dew. Smoothly they had passage through that charmed night, where winds were hushed asleep, and naught was heard save the waves talking beneath the bows of the ship, the lilting, changeless song of the steersman, and the creak, dip, and swash of oars keeping time to his singing. Vega burned like a sapphire near the zenith, and Arcturus low in the northwest, beaconing over Demonland. In the remote southeast Fomalhaut rose from the sea, a lonely splendour in the dim region of Capricorn and the fishes. So rode they till day broke, and a light wind sprang up fresh and keen. Just waked, and stood up to scan the grey glassy surface of the sea spread to vast distances where sky and water faded into one. Astern, great clouds bridged the gates of day, boiling upwards into crags of wine-dark vapour and burning plumes of sunrise. In the stainless spaces of the sky above these sailed the horned moon, frail and wan as a white foam flower blown from the waves. Westward, facing the thunder smoke of dawn, the fine far ridge of Cartazza was like cut crystal against the sky, the first island sentinel of many-mountained Demonland, his topmost cliffs dawn-illumined with pale gold and amethyst, while yet the lesser heights lay obscure, lapped in the folds of night. And with the opening day the mists swathing the mountain's skirts were lifted up in billowy masses, that grew and shrank and grew again, made restless by the wayward winds which morning waked in the hollow mountainside, and torn by them into wisps and streamers. Some were blown upward, steaming up the great gullies in the rocks below the peak, while now and then a puff of cloud swam free for a minute, floated a minute's space as ready to sail skyward, then indolently stooped again to the mountain wall, to veil it in an unsubstantial fleece of golden vapour. And now all the western seaboard of Demonland lay clear to view, stretching 50 miles and more, from Northhouse Skerries, past the Drake Holmes and the low downs of Kesterwick and Byland, beyond which tower the mountains of the Scarf, past the jagged skyline of the Thornbacks, and the far Neverdale peaks overhanging the wooded shores of Onwardlythe and lower Tiveranderdale, to the extreme southern headland, filmy pale in the distance, where the great range of Rimon Armon plunges its last wild bastion in the sea. As a lover gazing on his mistress, so gazed Lord Juss on Demonland rising from the sea. No word spake he till they came off Looking Haven Ness, and could see where beyond the beaked promontory the sound opened between Cartazza and the mainland. Albeit the outer sea was calm, the air in the sound was thick with spray from the churning of the waters among the reefs and swallowing shoals. For the tide ran like a mill race through that sound, and the roaring of it was plain to hear at 2 miles distance where they sailed. Juss said, "Mindest thou my shepherding of the ghoul fleet into yonder jaws? I would not tell thee for shame whenas the fit was on me, but this is the first day since the sending came upon us that I have not wished in my heart that the races of Cartazza had gulped me down also, and given me one ending with the accursed ghouls." Lord Brandok Dahar looked swiftly upon him, and was silent. Now in a short while was the ship come into Looking Haven, and alongside of the marble quay. There amid his folk stood Spitfire, who greeted them, saying, "I made all ready to bring 3 of you home in triumph from your ship, but Vol counselled against it. Glad am I that I took his counsel, and put by those things I had prepared. They had cut me to the heart to see them now." Juss answered him, "O my brother, this noise of hammers in Looking Haven, and these 10 keels laid on the slips, show me ye have been busied on things nearer our needs than bay leaves and the instruments of joy since thou camest home." So they took horse, and while they rode related to Spitfire all that had befallen since their faring to Carsey. In such wise came they north past the harbour, and so over Havershaw tongue to Beckfoot, where they took the upper paths that climb into Evendale, close under the screes of Starkstead Pike, and so came a little before noon to Galing. The black rock of Galing stands at the end of the spur that runs down from the south ridge of Little Drakeholm, dividing Brankdale from Evendale. On 3 sides the cliffs fall sheer from the castle walls to the deep woods of oak and birch and rowan tree, which carpet the flats of Moongarth Bottom, and feather the walls of the gill through which the Brankdale beck plunges in waterfall after waterfall. Only on the north-east may aught save a winged thing come at the castle, across a smooth grass-grown saddle less than a stone's throw in width. Over that saddle runs the paven way, leading from the Brankdale road to the Lion Gate, and within the gate is that garden of the grass-walk between the yews, where Lessingham stood with the martlet 9 weeks before, when first he came to Demonland. When night fell and supper was done, Juss walked alone on the walls of his castle, watching the constellations burn in the moonless sky above the mighty shadows of the mountains, listening to the hooting of the owls in the woods below, and the faint distant tinkle of cow-bells, and breathing the fragrance borne up from the garden on the night wind, that even in high summer tasted keen of the mountains and the sea. These sights and scents and voices of the holy night so held him in thrall that it wanted but an hour of midnight when he left the battlements, and called the sleepy housecarls to light him to his chamber in the south tower of Gaeling. Wondrous fair was the great four-posted bed of the Lord Juss, builded of solid gold, and hung with curtains of dark blue tapestry, whereon were figured sleep-flowers. The canopy above the bed was a mosaic of tiny stones, jet, serpentine, dark hyacinth, black marble, bloodstone, and lapis lazuli, so confounded in a maze of altering hue and lustre that they might mock the palpitating sky of night. And therein was the likeness of the constellation of Orion, held by Juss for guardian of his fortunes, the stars whereof, like those beneath the golden canopy in the presence chamber, were jewels shining of their own light, yet dead wood glimmering in the dark. For Betelgeuse was a ruby shining, and a diamond for Rigel, and pale topazes for the other stars. The four posts of the bed were of the thickness of a man's arm in their upper parts, but their lower parts great as his waist, and carven in the image of birds and beasts. At the foot of the bed a lion for courage, and an owl for wisdom, and at the head an alaunt for faithfulness of heart, and a kingfisher for happiness. On the cornice of the bed, and on the panels above the pillow against the wall, were carved Juss's deeds of derring-do, and the latest carving was of the sea-fight with the ghouls. To the right of the bed stood a table, with old books of songs, and books of the stars, and of herbs, and beasts, and travellers' tales, and there was Juss wont to lay his sword beside him while he slept. All the walls were panelled with dark, sweet-smelling wood, and armour and weapons hung thereon. Mighty chests and almeries, hasped and bound with gold, stood against the wall, wherein he kept his rich apparel. Windows opened to the west and south, and on each window ledge stood a bowl of palest jade, filled with white roses, and the air entering the bedchamber was laden with their scent. About cockcrow came a dream unto Lord Juss, standing by his head and touching his eyes, so that he seemed to wake and look about the chamber. And he seemed to behold an evil beast, all burning as a drake, busy in his chamber, with many heads, the most venomous that ever he the days of his life had seen, and about it its 5 fawns, like to itself, but smaller. It seemed to Juss that in place of his sword there lay a great spear of fair workmanship on the table by his bed, and it seemed to him in his dream that this spear had been his all his life, and was his greatest treasure, and that with it he might accomplish all things, and without it scarcely aught to his mind. He laboured to reach out his hand to the spear, but some power withheld him, so that for all his striving he might not stir. But that beast took up the spear in its jaws, and went with it forth from the chamber. It seemed to Juss that the power that held him departed with the departing of the beast, so that he leapt up and snatched down weapons from the wall, and made an onslaught on the fawns of that fell beast, that were tearing down the woven hangings, and marring with their fiery breath the figure of the kingfisher at the head of his bed. All the chamber was full of the reek of burning, and he thought his friends were with him in the chamber, Vol and Viz, and Zig and Spitfire and Brandok Dahar, fighting with the beasts, and the beasts prevailed against them. Then it seemed to him that the bedpost carven in the likeness of an owl spake to him, in his dream, in human speech. And the owl said, O fool, that shalt justly be put in great misery without end, except thou bring back the spear. Hast thou forgot that this only is thy greatest treasure, and most worthiest thy care? Therewith came back that grim and grisful beast into the chamber, and Juss assailed it, crying to the owl, Uncivil owl, where then must I find my spear that this beast hath hidden? And it seemed to him that the owl made answer, Inquire in Costra Belorn. So tumultuous was Lord Juss's dream, that he was flung at waking out of bed onto the deerskin carpets of the floor, and his right hand clutched the hilt of his great sword where it lay on the table by his bed, whereas in his dream he had beheld the spear. Mightily moved was he, and forthwith clothed himself, and faring through the dim corridors came to Spitfire's chamber, and sat on the bed and waked him, and just told him his dream, and said, I hold myself clean of all blame hereabout, for from that day forth this only hath been my care, how to find my dear brother and fetch him home, and only then to wreak myself on the witches. And what was this spear in my dream if not Goldry? This vision of the night kindleth for us a beacon fire we needs must seek to. It bade me inquire in Costra Belorn, and till that be done never will I rest, nor so much as think on aught besides. Spitfire answered and said, Thou beest our oldest brother, and I shall follow and obey thee in all that thou wilt do or shalt ordain hereof. Then fared Juss to the guest chamber, where Lord Brandok Dahar lay a-sleeping, and waked him and told him all. Brandok Dahar snuggled him under the bedclothes, and said, Let me be, and let me sleep yet 2 hours, Then will I rise and bathe and array myself and eat my morning meal, and thereafter will I take rede with thee and tell thee somewhat for thine advantage. I have not slept in a goose-feather bed and sheets of lawn these many weeks. If thou plague me now, by God, I will incontinently take horse over the stile to Crothering, and let thee and thine affairs go to the devil. So just laughed and left him in peace. And later, when they had eaten, they walked in a plashed alley, where the air was cool and the purple shadow on the path was dappled with bright flecks of sunshine. Lord Brandok said, Thou knowest that Costra Belorn is a great mountain, beside which our mountains of Demonland would seem but little hills unremarked, and that it standeth in the uttermost parts of earth, beyond the wastes of Upper Impland, and thou mightest search a year through all the peopled countries of the world, and not find one living soul who had so much as beheld it from afar. This much I know, said Lord Juss. Is thine heart utterly bent on this journey? Said Brandok, or is it not preposterous, and a thing to comfort our enemies, that we should thus at the bidding of a dream fly to far and perilous lands, rather than pay Witchland presently for the shame he hath done us? Juss answered him, My bed is hallowed by spells of such a virtue, that no naughty dream flown through the ivory gate, nor no noisome wizardry hath power to trouble his sleep who sleepeth there. This dream is true. For Witchland there is time enow. If thou wilt not go with me to Costra Belorn, I must go without thee. Enough, said Lord Brandok. Thou knowest for thee I tie my purse with a spider's thread. Then fare we must to Impland, and herein may I help thee. For listen while I tell thee a thing. Whenas I slew Geraes the 10th in Goblinland, Gaslight gave me along with other good gifts a great curiosity, a treatise or book, copied out on parchment by Borean his secretary, wherein it speaketh of all the ways to Impland, and what countries and kingdoms lie next to the Maruna, and the fronts thereof, and the marvels that he found in those lands. And all that is writ in this book was set down faithfully by Borean after the telling of Groa, the same which now hath part with the Witchlanders. Great honour had Groa, as then, from Gaslark for his far journeyings, and for that which is written in this book of wonders. And this it was that had first put in Gaslark's mind to send that expedition into Impland, which so reduced him, and came so wretchedly to naught. If then thou wilt seek to Costra Belorn, come home with me today, and I will show thee my book. So spake Lord Brandok, and Lord Juss straightway ordered forth the horses, and sent messengers to Vol under Cartadza, and to Viz at Dark Lairstead, bidding them meet him at Crothering with what speed they might. It was 4 hours before noon when Juss, Spitfire, and Brandok rode down from Galing and through the woods of Moongarth Bottom at the foot of the lake, taking the main bridle road up Breakingdale that runs by the western margin of Moonmere under the buttresses of the Scarf. They rode slowly, for the sun was strong on their back. Glassy was the lake and like a turquoise, and the birch-clad slopes to the east and north, and the bare rugged ridges of Stathfell and Budrefell beyond, were mirrored in its depths. On the left as they rode, the spurs of the Scarf impended from on high in piled bastions of black porphyry, like giants' castles, and little valleys choked with monstrous boulders, among which the silver birches crowding showed like tiny garden plants, ran steeply back between the spurs. Up those valleys appeared successively the main summits of the Scarf, savage and remote, frowning downward as it were between their own knees, Glomery Pike, Micklescarf, and Illstack. By noon they had climbed to the extreme head of Breakingdale, and halted on the stile, a little beyond the watershed, under the sheer northern wall of Ildrennock. Before them the pass plunged steeply into Armaderdale. The lower reach of Switchwater shone 15 miles or more to the west, well nigh hidden in the heat haze. Nearer at hand, in the northwest, lay Ramerick Mere, bosomed among the smooth-backed Kellierland hills, and the easternmost uplands of Shalgreth Heath, with the sea beyond. And on the valley floor, near the water's meet where Transdale runs into Armaderdale, it was possible to descry the roof of Zig's house at Many Bushes. When they came down thither, Zig was out a-hunting, so they left word with his lady wife, and drank a stirrup-cup, and rode on, up Switchwater Way, and for 12 miles or more along the southern shore of Switchwater. So dropped they into Gashtondale, and thence rounding the western slopes of Erngate End, came upon the Crothering side, when the shadows were lengthening in the golden summer evening. The side ran gently west for a league or more, to where Thunderfirth lay like beaten gold beneath the sun. Across the firth, the pine forests of Westmark, old as the world, rose toward Broxty Edge and Gemsar Edge, a far-flung amphitheatre of bare cliff and scree shutting in the prospect to the north. High on the left towered the precipices of Erngate End. Southward and southeastward lay the sea. So rode they down the side, through deep peaceful meadows, fair with white ox-eye daisies, bluebells and yellow goatsbeard and sea campion, deep blue gentians, agrimony and wild marjoram, and pink clover and bindweed and great yellow buttercups feasting on the sun. And on an eminence beyond which the land fell away more steeply toward the sea, the onyx towers of Crothering, standing above woods and gardens, showed milk white against heaven and the clear Hyaline. When they were now but half a mile from the castle, Just said, Behold and see! The Lady Mevrian hath espied us from afar, and rideth forth to bring thee home. Bran Dr. Har cantered ahead to meet her, a lady light of build and exceeding fair to look upon, brave of carriage like a war-horse, soft of feature, clear-browed, grey-eyed and proud-eyed, sweet-mouthed, but not as one who can speak naught but sweetness. Her robe was of pale buff-coloured silk, with corsage covered as by a spider's web with fine golden threads, and she wore a point-lace ruffle stiffened with gold and silver wire, and spangled with little diamonds. Her deep hair, black as the raven's wing, was fastened with pins of gold, and a yellow rose that nestled in its coils was as the moon looking forth among thick clouds of night. "Doings be afoot, my lady sister," said Lord Brandok Har. "One king of Witchland have we done down since we sailed hence, and guested in Courcy with another, little to our content. All which things I'll tell thee anon. Now lieth our road south for Impland, and Crothering is but our caravanserai." She turned her horse, and they rode all in company into the shadow of the ancient cedars that clustered to the north of the home meads and pleasure gardens, stately, gaunt-limbed, flat-browed, bleak against the sky. On the left a lily-paven lake slept cool beneath mighty elms, with a black swan near the bank, and her 4 cygnets dozing in a row, their heads tucked beneath their wings, so that they looked like balls of grey-brown froth floating on the water. The path leading to the bridge gate zigzagged steeply up the mound between low broad balustrades of white onyx, bearing at intervals square onyx pots, planted some with yellow roses and some with wondrous flowers, great and delicate, with frail white shell-like petals. Deep mysterious scents had those flowers, thick with soft hairs within, and dark within with velvety purple, streaked with black and blood-colour and dust of gold. The castle of Lord Brandok Har, standing at the top of the mound, was circled by a ditch both broad and deep. The gate before the drawbridge was of iron, gilded and richly wrought. The towers and gatehouse were of white onyx like the castle itself, and on either hand before the gate was a colossal marble hippogriff, standing more than 30 feet high at the withers, and the wings and hoofs and talons of the hippogriffs and their manes and forelocks were overlaid with gold, and their eyes carbuncles of purest lustre. Over the gate was written in letters of gold, "Ye braggers an awe, be skeered an awa, frae Brandok Har." But to tell even a 10th part of the marvels rich and beautiful that were in the house of Crothering, its cool courts and colonnades rich with gems and fragrant with costly spices and strange blooms, its bedchambers where, caught like Aphrodite in her golden net, the spirit of sleep seemed ever to shake slumber from its plumes, and none might be waking long in those chambers but sweet sleep overcame their eyelids, the chamber of the sun and the chamber of the moon, and the great middle hall with its high gallery and ivory stair. To tell of all these were but to cloy imagination with picturing in one while of overmuch glory and splendour. Naught befell that night save the coming of Zig before sundown, and of those brethren Vol and Viz in the night, having ridden hard in obedience to the word of Jus. In the morning, when they had eaten their day meal, the lords of Demonland went down into Pleasaunces, and with them the Lady Mevrian, and in an alley that was roofed with beams of cedar resting on marble pillars, the beams and pillars smothered with dark red roses, they sat looking eastward across a sunk garden. The weather was sweet and gracious, and thick dew lay on the pale terraced lawns that led down among flower beds to the fish-pond in the midst. The water made a cool mirror, whereon floated yellow and crimson water-lilies opening to the sky. All the greens and flower colours glowed warm and clean, but soft withal and shadowy, veiled in the grey haze of the summer morning. They sat here and there as they listed, on chairs and benches, near a huge tank or vase of dark green jade, where sulphur-coloured lilies grew in languorous beauty, their back-curled petals showing the scarlet anthers, and all the air was heavy with their sweetness. The great jade vase was round and flat like the body of a tortoise, open at the top where the lilies grew. It was carved with scales, as it were the body of a dragon, and a dragon's head agaping reared itself at one end, and at the other the tail curved up and over like the handle of a basket, and the tail had little fore and hind feet with claws, and a smaller head at the end of the tail gaped downwards, biting at the large head. 4 legs supported the body, and each leg was a small dragon, standing on its hind feet, its head growing into the parent body, as the thigh or shoulder joint should join the trunk. In the curve of the creature's neck, his back propped against its head, sat the Lord Brandok Dahar in graceful ease, one foot touching the ground, the other swinging free. And in his hands was the book, bound in dark, puce-coloured goatskin and gold, given him by Gazlark in years gone by. Zig watched him idly turn the pages while the others talked. Leaning toward Mevrian, he whispered in her ear, "Is not he able and shapen for to subdue and put under him all the world, thy brother? A man of blood and peril, and yet so fair to behold that it is a marvel." Her eyes danced. She said, "It is pure truth, my lord." Now spake Spitfire, saying, "Read forth to us, I pray thee, the Book of Groa, for my soul is afire to set forth on this faring." "'Tis writ somewhat crabbedly," said Brandok Dahar, "and most damnably long. I spent half last night a searching on't, and 'tis most apparent no other way lieth to these mountains save by the Maruna, and across the Maruna is, if Groa say true, but one way, and that from the Gulf of Muelva, a 20 days' journey from north by south-est. For here he telleth of water springs by the way, but he saith in other parts of the desert be no water springs, save only springs venomous, where the water reeketh like a seething pot continually, having somewhat a sulphureous and somewhat unpleasant savour. And the ground nourisheth here no plant nor herb, except it be venomous champignons or toadstools." "If he say true," said Spitfire, "he is a turncoat and a renegado, wherefore not therefore a liar?" "But a philosopher," answered Juss. "I knew him well of old in Goblin land, and I judge him to be one who is not false save only in policy. Subtle of mind he is, and dearly loveth plotting and scheming, and, as I think, perversely affecteth ever the losing side if he be brought into any quarrel, and this hath dragged him oft times to misfortune. But in this book of his travels he must needs speak truth, as it seemeth to me, to be true to his own self." The Lady Mevrian looked approvingly on Lord Juss, and her eye twinkled, for well it liked her humour to hear men's natures so divined. "O Juss, friend of my heart," said Lord Brandok Dahar, "thy words proceed as ever they did from the true fount of wisdom, and I embrace them and thee. This book is a guide which we shall follow not helter-skelter, but as old men of war. If then the right road to Morna Maruna lie from the Gulf of Muelva, were we not best sail straight thitherward, and lay up our ships in that gulf where the coast and countryside be without habitation, rather than fare to some nearer haven of outer impland, such as Arlen Mouth, whither thou and Spitfire fared 6 summers ago?" "Not Arlen Mouth or this journey," said Juss. "Some sport perchance we might obtain there, had we leisure for fighting with the accursed inhabitants. But every day's delay we now do make holdeth my brother another day in bondage. The princes and phases of the imps have many strong-walled towns and towers in all those coastlands, and hard by in a mediamnis of the river Arlen, in Orpish, is the great castle of Fax Fair Faz, whereto Goldry and I drave him home from Leda Nanguna." "'Tis an ill coast, too, to find a landing," said Brandok Dahar, turning the leaves of the book. "As he saith, Impland the Moor beginneth at the west side of the mouth of Arlen, and occupieth all the land unto the headland Cibrion, and therefro south away to the Corsh, by guess a 700 miles, whereby the sea is not there of nature favourable, nor no haven is or coming in meet for ships." So after some talk and searching of that book of Groa, they determined this should be their plan: to fare to Impland by way of the straits of Melikafkaz and the Didonian Sea, and so lay up their ships in the Gulf of Muelva, and landing there start straightway across the wilderness to Morna Maruna, even as Groa had described the way. "Ere we leave it," said Brandok Dahar, "hear what he speaketh concerning Costra Beloin. This he beheld from Morna Maruna, whereof he saith, The country is hilly, sandy, and barren of wood, and come as forest full of linged moors and mosses, with stony hills. Here is a mighty strong and used burrow for flying serpents in some barren heathy and sandy ground, and there by the little round castle of Morna Maruna standeth on Omprain edge, as on the limit of the world, sore weather-beaten and in ruin. This castle was brent in time of war, spoiled and razed by King Garais the Fort of Witchland in ancient days. And they say there was blameless folk dwelled therein, and right gentle, nor was there any need for Garais to have used them so cruelly. But he caused the whole household there to appear before him, and then slow some out of hand, and the residue he throw all down the steep cliff. And but few supervivid after the great fall, and these fled away through the untrodden forests of Bavinon, and without question perished there in great sorrow and misery. Some fable that it was for this cruel fact's sake that King Arise was eat by divils on the Maruna, with all his host, one man only coming home again to tell of these things befallen. Now mark. From Morna Maruna I beheld southaway 2 great mountains standing over Bavinian, as 2 queens in beauty seated in the sky, by estimation 20 leagues for hence, above many more ice-robed mountains supereminent. The which, as I learned, was Coster Bellorn, the one, and the other Coster Pivrarca, and I viewed them continually unto the going down of the sun, and that was the fairest sight and the most beautifulest and gallant marvel that mine eyen hath seen. Therewith talked I with the small things that dwell there in the ruins and in the bushes growing round about, as it is my wont, and amongst them one of those birds called martlets, that have feet so little that they seem to have none. And this little martlet, sitting in a framboosier or raspis bush, told me that none may come alive unto Coster Bellorn, for the manticoras of the mountains will certainly eat his brains ere he come thither, and were he so fortunate as scape these manticoras, yet could he never climb up the great crags of ice and rock on Coster Bellorn, for none is so strong as to scale them but by art magical, and such is the virtue of that mountain that no magic availeth there, but only strength and wisdom alone. And as I say, these would not avail to climb those cliffs and ice rivers. What be these manticores of the mountains that eat men's brains? Asked the Lady Mevrian. This book is so excellent well writ, said her brother, that thine answer appeareth on this same page. The beast Manticora, which is as much as to say devourer of men, renneth, as I heard tell, on the skirt of the mountains below the snowfelds. These be monstrous beasts, ghastly and full of horror, enemies to mankind, of a red colour, with 2 rows of huge great teeth in their mouths. It hath the head of a man, his eyen like a goot, and the body of a lion lancing out sharp prickles fro behind. And his tail is the tail of a scorpion, and is more deliverer to go than is foul to flee, and his voice is as the roaring of 10 lions. These beasts, said Spitfire, were alone enough to draw me thither. I shall bring thee home a small one, madam, to keep chained in the court. That should dash me from thy friendship for ever, cousin, said Mevrian, stroking the feathery ears of her little marmoset that cuddled in her lap. That which feedeth on brains were overnourished in Demonland, and belike would overrun the whole countryside. Send it to Witchland, said Zig, where when it hath eat up Grow and Corrund it may sup lightly on the king, and then most fortunately starve for lack of its proper nutriment. Just stood up from his seat. Thou and I and Spitfire, said he to Brandok Har, must to work roundly and gather strength, for 'tis already midsummer. You, viz. Vol and Zig, must have the warding of our homes whiles we be gone. We cannot be less than 2,000 swords on this faring. How many ships, Vol, asked Lord Brandok Har, canst thou give us, busked and boon, ere this moon wane? There be 14 afloat, said Vol. Besides these, 10 keels lie on the slips at Lookinghaven, and 9 more hath Spitfire but now laid down on the beach before his house at Owlswick. 30 in sum, said Spitfire. You see we have not twiddled our thumbs whilst you were gone. Just paced back and forth with great strides, his brow clouded and his jaw clenched. In a while he said, Laxus hath 40 sail, dragons of war. I am not so idle-headed as fare without an army into Impland, but certain it is that if our ill-willers would move war against us, we stand in apparent weakness, here or abroad, to throw back their onset. Vol said, Of these 19 ships a-building, no more than 2 can take the water before a month be past, and but 7 more ere 6 months' time, push we never so mightily the work. The season weareth, and my brother wasteth in duress. We must sail ere another moon grow old, said Juss. Vol said, Then with 16 sail thou sailest, O Juss, and then thou leavest us not one ship at home till more be finished and launched. How can we leave you so? Cried Spitfire. But Brandok Har looked towards his lady sister, met her glance, and was satisfied. The choice lieth fair before us, said he. If we will eat the egg, little need to debate whether the shell must go. Mevrian rose from her seat laughing, and said, Then let the council rise, my lords. And her eyes grew serious, and she said, Shall they make rhymes upon us that we of Demonland, whom men repute and hold the mightiest lords in all the world, hung sheepishly back from this high needful enterprise, lest, our greatest captains being abroad, our enemies might haply take us home at disadvantage? It shall not be said of the women of Demonland that they upheld such counsels. End of chapter 8.